The wife betrayed me with her younger boss and is trying to save the marriage, but her actions lead to the final breakup. At the dinner table, Olivia had just finished practicing her speech, and I took my seat. For weeks, she had been refining it, looking for mistakes, but there were none. Her notes were very detailed, covering every point she wanted to make, and even having answers ready for any possible counter-arguments. Her confidence in the efficacy of her speech was palpable. Even if she didn't succeed, she was certain that she wouldn't lose. She seemed happy at first, but her grin soon disappeared as she considered the potential consequences. Now that she was happy with her phrasing, she turned her attention to the time. Olivia reasoned that I would be more likely to accept if she presented it to me gently, appealing to my rational thinking. Additionally, she was aware that this would provide me the opportunity to formulate rebuttals. She knew after 21 years of marriage that I often won rational arguments. She thus opted for astonishment and shock rather than a gradual approach. Slammed down on me with such force that I gave in before I could even consider. Did my consent play a key role? Without a doubt. Nothing could advance in the absence of it. There was no danger involved with it. Olivia got to her feet and flitted about the dining room, clearly attempting to divert her attention from the agony she was going to deal me. She gave the impression that I was deserving, but I never understood why. She said that I had put her in a corner, and that was why she acted the way she did. Thus, it was my fault, according to her. In an effort to recall the last time Olivia had been in the dining room by herself during the week, I cast my eyes about the space, for the last 8 months at least. Prior to that, she would always be the first one to return home after school to greet the children. How had things evolved? She had taken over for Jacob 8 months ago when he was moved from another branch. At first, their connection was entirely business-related. Things changed, however, as he invited her to remain late and rewarded her with supper. They found out they had a lot in common, even though he was 5 years younger than her. Their bond was strengthened by their shared appreciation for the arts, cinema, and style. His increasingly effusive praise of her work and physical attractiveness made her feel both pampered and anxious about her own aging. Their after-hours meetings became routine, transitioning from business talks to more relaxed coffee chats. After just 2 months of pretending to work together, they began spending their nights together. She began to forego family meals in favor of going out to restaurants with him more often as a result of his loneliness and aversion to eating alone. They began going to the movies and TV programs even on weekends by the 4th month. She made up an excuse about needing to put in more hours since she was banking on a possible promotion to explain her absence. I wholeheartedly backed her newfound desire, even if she felt a twinge of shame for lying. She knew it was wrong of a married woman to behave in this manner, but after 19 years of giving her all as a mother, she deserved a break. She experienced a new kind of appreciation from Jacob. I had become used to expressing my gratitude, but Jacob's focus restored her sense of worth. With a new sense of direction, I stepped up my game at home and took on extra chores. I spoke out because I didn't want our 14-year-old youngest to be left alone. However, I did not object when Olivia sternly told me to cut down on my hours if I was unhappy. I got up bright and early the next day to hustle my way to the office. I got back to assisting the kids with their schoolwork and making supper that night. Olivia expressed her gratitude for my support of her work with a quiver in her voice. I picked up my game once again, keeping the kids occupied while her weekend work started. I didn't regard it as a chore. In fact, I loved spending time with the kids again. Even our son, who is 18 years old, gave up time with his friends so that he could go on adventures with his siblings and myself. Just 4 months ago, Olivia and Jacob's relationship was all business. Nevertheless, Jacob proposed reserving a hotel room for the afternoon on a Sunday after lunch. Thinking it was funny, she first laughed it off. However, her unease was heightened when she recognized his seriousness. She quickly thought up an explanation and ignored it. Secretly, she was furious with him for putting their relationship in jeopardy. She was certain she would not betray me. Even while Olivia missed him, Jacob's cold professionalism the following Tuesday made her miss him even more. She felt her heart sink at the thought of their lost meals, conversations, and praises. She tried not to stay after work, but she knew that her self-esteem had grown dependent on his acknowledgement of her strengths, both at work and in her personal life. No matter how careful and complimentary I was, it just wasn't enough. There should have been warning signs in two instances that week. First of all, when she got home from soccer practice on Thursday, I asked her to finish making supper since it was half done. Dinner was postponed because Olivia stayed seated when I came back. Our first encounter ensued as a result of this. My doubts about her work ethic made Olivia explode, and she took out her resentment at Jacob's apparent disregard for her on me. She was much more composed by the time I asked her if we were all right before bed, and she flat out denied that anything had happened. Nevertheless, her inattentive attitude made me feel more and more rejected by her repeated rejections. Jacob apologized to Olivia on Saturday afternoon, saying that he was acting out because he was lonely and because he was near an attractive lady. Although Olivia acknowledged his remorse, she made it plain that she would not tolerate such approaches. Olivia reassured me that she would be true to our marriage and that she was fully dedicated to it. Jacob boldly asked if any of her co-workers would be willing to assist him in calming down after he expressed his dissatisfaction. Because of her protective response, Olivia immediately cut him off. In spite of this uncomfortable encounter, they parted ways in good spirits, agreeing to reunite the next day for lunch and a concert. On Saturday night, Olivia returned home, which was the second indicator of her increasing fixation. When she saw the kids and myself getting ready for our camping vacation, she seemed very perplexed. This weekend retreat had been in the works for a month, discussed at length over dinner every night. She pretended, however, that she was unaware of it. I declined her offer to reschedule for the next weekend, citing the fact that this was our last opportunity before winter arrived, as my justification. She remained home by herself, distraught and frustrated, while we embarked on our journey. It wasn't until the following day that she attempted to contact us that I realized the extent to which this had damaged her. She became lonely and distressed since we were outside of mobile service range. She didn't hold us responsible for failing to alert her when we returned, perhaps due to her worry that she could have disregarded our repeated reminders. In order to be ready for work the next day, she declined intimacy that night. After I implied that her ambition was causing tension between us, she quickly refocused on her plans with Jacob. Olivia woke up one night just before 3 o'clock in the morning, perhaps understanding the damage she was doing to our family and marriage. She was obviously terrified of my leaving and leaving her to raise the children alone. Seeking solace in my embrace, she drew nearer to me in an effort to diffuse the situation with Jacob. Considering my early wake-up hour, she refrained from initiating intimacy, though she was inclined to. Upon her return home that evening, I felt compelled to embrace her tightly, fulfilling her craving for intimacy. Something, nevertheless, had shifted inside her. She was unable to completely return my love while she was under Jacob's control. Things with Jacob and our family, at least on the surface, went back to normal the week after that. But this was the new normal. Olivia seemed unconcerned by the worried stares I gave her as we joked and laughed together. I begged her to drop the promotion until I finally snapped, telling her how much I loved and worried about our family. There is no worse day than today to express my emotions, unfortunately. Jacob has recently dropped hints that he was interested in developing their connection further. Olivia was too busy to hear my sincere request and too conflicted to return Jacob's ego-boosting remarks. I would have won hands down if she had to make a choice. She relied on Jacob for approval and on me for stability, but she was determined to avoid making that decision. She persisted in coming up with a way out of the danger zone even after I stopped talking. At 2 in the morning, she had already thought of a strategy. The next night, she told Jacob about it, stressing how dedicated she was to me and how she would never cheat. To make it seem like a random selection, she suggested we play a 3-way with Jacob as the third player. With my okay, she intended to figure out how to spend time alone with Jacob afterwards if it was successful. Jacob was hesitant at first, but he eventually accepted, sure that she would be his as soon as they broke beyond the barrier. She was appreciative of his permission and let him kiss her properly for the first time after he assured her he wouldn't keep waiting forever. Nevertheless, she restrained him from touching her breast by removing his hand and restating her commitment to being faithful. Olivia seemed very comfortable talking to me about this. We had previously experimented with role-playing, and our relationship had always been honest, particularly with our wants. Nevertheless, she waited until I was sleeping before bringing it up that night, since she was too tired. She couldn't help but let out a little groan the night after that. as she indulged in self-pleasure while daydreaming about Jacob. I moved closer to her as her excitement grew. "Just a little unjust, isn't it?" I said. Curiosity piqued. She said, "Why, what's unfair about it? You lying there pleasuring yourself after you've been rejecting me for the past few months," I remarked. Olivia was taken aback. "Has it really been that long, sweetheart?" "Absolutely. Ever since you started chasing that promotion, you've either been too exhausted, too irritable, or simply brushed me off whenever I tried to initiate something," I said, with a sense of shame. Olivia saw this as a sign that she could now bring up the subject that had been bothering her. As her obsession with Jacob began to strain our marriage, she paused for a minute to rationalize her actions. Getting ready to open up, Olivia's point of view. I was so engrossed in my thoughts about how to begin this delicate talk that I failed to see my husband Daniel sighing and turning away once again. It was as if I were trying to tell Daniel that he was no longer satisfying me by proposing a three-way after months of not being intimate. No, a more secure method was required. I chose to get back in touch with Daniel first. I rolled over to him and drew him close, but the second he turned over on his back, he started snoring. Too ashamed to continue, I froze. My pent-up passions needed to be released. My marriage and life seemed to be going swimmingly until Jacob entered there. Jacob seemed to be becoming a little frustrated with me after 2 days of doing nothing. I wanted to avoid any criticism, so I kissed him again the next day. I was so excited that I passionately kissed Daniel when I arrived home, even though he behaved and didn't make any approaches this time. While I was doing it, I touched his crotch. We skipped putting the kids to bed since Daniel's expression changed. After supper, we headed to the little outside shed where Daniel had set up a hot tub, his method of ensuring that our sex life would continue, even after the kids had grown up. Upon entering, Daniel enthusiastically began to establish physical contact. I made a joke about Daniel's impatience, and he said he didn't want to give me an opportunity to reconsider. Daniel gave his customary performance, but the moment I closed my eyes and recalled the sensation of Jacob's bulge on my calf earlier in the day was the peak for me. On Sunday morning, Daniel roused me in a manner I used to like by caressing me intimately with his tongue. I had a hard time seeing Daniel as Jacob, even though he probably believed I stifled my groans with the pillow. Despite the confusion, it was a delightful experience. Later that night, I mustered up the courage to broach the delicate subject with my spouse. I softly brought up the fact that we were getting into a rhythm and that the concept of a three-way was fascinating after complimenting his latest performance. Being receptive, Daniel proposed we perform the part right away. I was pleasantly surprised, so I suggested we get back to the hot tub. We were so worn out after each meeting that we just wanted to crash on the bed. I almost scrapped the idea when my feelings for Daniel returned to an intimate level. Jacob became more agitated, and the praises began to wane about the halfway point of what I saw as Daniel's adjustment phase. To maintain his attention, I felt the urge to kiss him almost every day. Eventually, even that wasn't sufficient, and I could feel Jacob regaining his distance. After a long soak in our hot tub shed 2 days ago, I felt prepared to broach a delicate subject with Daniel. My confidence in talking about our sexual experiences and my plans for our future had been steadily growing, but Daniel began talking about it before I could mention anything. "Sweetheart, the past few weeks have been amazing. I found it incredibly arousing to have our guests join us in our intimacy. How do you see this fitting into our role play?" Daniel said with excitement. The realization that there had been a significant misunderstanding stunned me. I wanted to know what you were getting at when you asked whether I wanted a three-way with another lady. I had no idea. When Daniel, who was also perplexed, replied, "Isn't that what this has been leading up to?" I saw that the misunderstanding had arisen because our wishes had not been expressed clearly. "No, Daniel. I was thinking about bringing another man into it," I said, excited to have an open discussion. In response, Daniel said, "Oh," which allowed me to be more direct. "Listen, honey, I've been really excited these past few weeks. Is there any chance we could make my fantasy a reality with another man?" I said, unsure but optimistic. My proposal was considered by Daniel. "Well, honestly, I don't see that ending well for us. I thought we both liked the idea of including another woman. The thought of another man doesn't sit well with me," he said, obviously uneasy. Impressed by his willingness to listen, I said, "What if it's something I feel strongly about, Daniel?" Daniel gave my remarks some thought. "I need time to think about it." The only way I might consider it is if we could also include another woman at a different time, he proposed, seeking a middle ground. No, I objected. We should just forget about the possibility of you seeing another lady, Daniel said with conviction. We are also unable to incorporate any further men. It's not an option. I had to cope with the fallout of our failed negotiation and the tension it created the following day. When I informed Jacob about the conversation, he was visibly distressed, accusing me of not trying hard enough and giving me the silent treatment for the remainder of the week. On Wednesday, after everyone had left, Jacob requested a private conversation with me, appearing genuinely saddened as he expressed his inability to continue being around such a stunning woman who wasn't sexually available to him. He kissed me goodbye, asked me to remember him fondly, and understood that our relationship had to return to its professional nature. As he began to walk away, I turned around and said, "Wait, Jacob, give me another week, please." He then asked, "What do you have in mind?" "I'm not sure," I inquired. Jacob begged, "Just give me a week to think of something." We kissed again before we went our separate ways. I was left to revert to my distracted self over the weekend. From Daniel's point of view, it was hard to ignore Olivia's recent mood swings and her newfound fixation on 3 ways. I also couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss when she returned home late on Thursday. Her lipstick was smudged. Cue the investigation. Olivia had the weekend to gather her thoughts, and by Sunday, she eagerly approached Jacob after work, her enthusiasm palpable. He seemed genuinely interested in her plan, but he interrupted her halfway through, introducing a cautionary point. "You know, Olivia, he might have expectations," Olivia said, who was always aware of her boundaries. "There are some concessions I am willing to make, but I have clear boundaries I want to cross. We'll just have to see how things play out. Just remember, if he doesn't agree, then I am pulling out of our plans altogether," Jacob said, hoping to make sure they were both on the same page. "I get it, Jacob. If that is the outcome, I am ready to accept it," Olivia conceded. As an example of his comprehension, Jacob offered to be a test subject if necessary. Olivia worked diligently on Tuesday and Wednesday, with his implied consent, to formulate her plan. No matter what she did, she vowed to her family and marriage that it wouldn't be risky. Like winning a 900 pot in a poker game, she was afraid to risk losing it all. She intended to hide it in a safe, where it would be safe even from her own prying eyes. She could play for the chance to win another $900, or she may play for the first pot regardless of the outcome. Jacob escorted her to dinner on Wednesday night so they could practice. Following the main course, he encouraged her to make the most of it. "Well, Jacob, I've decided to go at him strong and fast tomorrow night. I'll start by expressing my deep love for him and how much I cherish our children, mentioning their future milestones like graduations, weddings, and grandkid christenings. Then I'll bring up our retirement plans." Jacob's thoughts started to wander. He picked up on the fact that women tend to lead with emotional hyperbole, which may win over other women but would fall flat with males who prefer logic to feeling. Hearing Olivia's voice ask, "Are you paying attention, Jacob?" jolted him back to reality. "Absolutely, Olivia," Jacob said, shifting his attention back to Oliva. After that, she said, "I'll remind him that I offered him a chance to join in on harmless fun, which he declined. I'll tell him that he's left me with no choice but to seek affection elsewhere, starting with a rendezvous on Sunday night. Before he can process this, I'll stress that it's purely physical, just a bit of emotional enjoyment. I apologize, Jacob. I might need to stretch the truth a bit there. If he truly loves me, he'll allow it. I estimate I have about a 70-30 chance of him agreeing on the spot. What do you think?" Jacob knew the chances were poor, but he didn't tell anybody. He knew his odds of wooing Olivia were slim, but he was willing to take a risk for the excitement of the chase. He reasoned that he could have fun with it once, without worrying about the consequences, but that having more than one encounter would raise the likelihood that his boss would discover his affair and fire him. Why put yourself in danger twice? Being in comparable circumstances had given him the satisfaction of having experienced the most of the excitement. He hoped that if he helped Olivia out, she would be more successful, and he would get a little more out of it. Jacob said that he would have proposed an open relationship if he had been Olivia's spouse, but that Olivia was adamant about not wanting anyone else to have her husband. She threatened to leave her spouse if he proposed such a thing. After that, Jacob proposed that Olivia use the fear of divorce and the prospect of him spending little time with the children as a means to discourage her husband from making any unwelcome advances. Even as a bluff, Olivia despised the use of such threats. Jacob made an effort to get Olivia to assert herself by blaming her husband for rejecting her proposals. He took her hands, met her gaze, and assured her that she deserved to be happy after all the years she had spent prioritizing her family. Olivia began to see Jacob's point, but she made it plain that Daniel's approval of the plan was crucial. There was a risk she may bail if she believed Daniel wasn't on board. Jacob tried to reassure Olivia that they were in a win-win position, but he had his doubts about Olivia's optimism. Olivia made notes for her strategy as they awaited dessert. Jacob escorted her to her vehicle after dinner, and the two of them kissed goodbye. This concluded their conversation on making the most of their difficult circumstances by zeroing in on what they wanted and what they were ready to compromise on. Instead of fighting against Jacob's gentle grasp, she drew nearer to him. It almost overpowered her to sense his response through his garments. For a second, Jacob thought about continuing, but ultimately chose to keep things lighthearted. "Okay, honey, I'll make reservations for our hotel room for Sunday night. Or how about we visit your place?" "I've never been there before," Jacob said with a mix of interest and enthusiasm. "No way," she said, her tone belying any seriousness. "The walls are too thin and you'll be screaming too much, I can assure you of that." Returning home to her family, Olivia walked shakily. Unusually, she seemed preoccupied. After everyone else had gone to bed, she suddenly realized she was alone by herself. Olivia wasted little time the next day, sleeping in until she was able to see the kids off at the bus stop. She assembled all the necessary items and reminded them that Daniel's parents will be collecting them for a sleepover. To prevent herself from crumbling, she contacted Jacob many times and planned the day off. For Olivia, the inability to tell a believable lie was her worst flaw. To be ready for Daniel's question, would he ask if she had someone in mind already? She practiced saying no in front of the mirror. Her original intention was to announce that she was going out and would let herself be tempted. Doing anything different would lead to awkward inquiries. Olivia told herself she could do it if she just remained calm. Sitting at the dinner table that night, she braced herself to face Daniel, who was about to arrive any second. The major event she was looking forward to was 24 hours away, on Tuesday night. As Olivia prepared herself, she kept telling herself, "Stay firm, Olivia. You deserve this." Daniel arrived home at 5:30 p.m., which was half an hour later than normal, but the kids were at their grandparents'. Olivia was off work that day, so he must have planned his coming accordingly. Upon entering, he saw her seated at the dinner table, a bottle of wine almost depleted before her. Something was definitely wrong, since Olivia seldom drank more than one glass, which alerted Daniel right away. It wasn't your average celebration. He sensed that Olivia may be more forthcoming and exposed at this very time. Daniel said, "Hi, Olivia. What are we celebrating? Did you get that promotion?" In an effort to assess the situation with a blend of interest and worry. "We aren't celebrating just yet, Daniel. Please take a seat. We have some important business to discuss," Olivia said, her tone solemn and suggesting a more in-depth discussion. Olivia was becoming more anxious, even with her liquid courage. Under her breath, she said, "Stay firm, Olivia. You deserve this." However, Daniel was one step ahead of her. "I'm guessing this has something to do with your recent distractions? Maybe it's related to the fact that you've been distant from the family for the past 8 months? Or the 6-month dry spell in the bedroom, except for those 2 good weeks? Let me guess, Olivia. You still love me. You see us attending our kids' milestones and enjoying retirement together. But because I didn't agree to your 3-way idea, you plan to cheat on me with your lover. Is it happening tonight or tomorrow?" Olga was struck by his remarks. Her whole speech had been paraphrased by him just now. Amid her fear, she did her best to deliver the speech she had prepared. "But I deserve this, Daniel. It would only be physical, just a bit of fun to spice things up," she said softly. In her terrified condition, Olivia persisted in reading passages from the screenplay that Jacob had assisted her with. She threatened Daniel with financial ruin, divorce, and a loss of custody of his children if he slept with another woman. She observed a change in Daniel's countenance mid-sentence. Instead of fierce and stormy, it was intense and resigned. As Olivia tried to make sense of it all, she was interrupted by inquiries about identities. Daniel's determination to uncover the identities of those involved demonstrated his seriousness. Olivia, taken aback, hesitated to divulge Jacob's identity before adamantly denying that he was capable of such behavior. The intensity of Daniel's questioning rose. He cited her recent actions as evidence that she was meeting Jacob behind his back in his accusation. Daniel continued to be doubtful, wondering if Jacob had impacted Olivia's choices, even though Olivia had protested. Feeling humiliated, insulted, and terrified, Olivia was in a difficult position. She found it difficult to demonstrate her allegiance when the conversation veered off course. Aside from having meals and talks with Jacob, her late evenings and weekends spent out were completely harmless, she said. But Daniel didn't buy it. He brought up an incident when she returned home looking unclean and implied that it had anything to do with a sexual encounter. Olivia became quite angry and yelled out that there had been no cheating, only chatting, eating, and kissing. She begged him to trust that she would never do anything to ruin their marriage. In a state of panic, Daniel hid his face in his hands. The sight of him sobbing was a first for Olivia. The thought that she might inflict such profound suffering on him was terrifying. She felt a surge of terror at the prospect of ruining her life due to a misunderstanding. Olivia was prepared to scrap her plans with Jacob in a last-ditch attempt to save face, thinking it would fix everything. Before she could even speak, Daniel had already decided that her behavior had ruined his family and marriage. She was accused of threatening to remove him from his children, and he expressed betrayal and anguish at the accusation. With a sense of finality, Daniel's words froze Olivia as he strode out the door. It was already too late when she mustered up the nerve to pursue him. From Olivia's point of view, Daniel was almost at his vehicle when I missed the opportunity to provide my last alternative. I made another attempt to insist on my innocence when we were near his vehicle. Daniel hesitated, but he remained facing away from me. His words demonstrated that he did not forgive me for what I had done. In his eyes, I was cheating whether I lied about where I was, went out to dinner with Jacob, kissed him, or spent time away from the family. I was left to deal with the fallout of my decisions as Daniel announced the end of our relationship in a resigned tone. Too astonished to even weep, I got down on my knees and watched as he drove away. I couldn't even get myself to stand up. I kept telling myself, "Stay firm, you can lose. You deserve this," as I attempted to recall my strategies for our conflict. Our marriage's possible demise had previously seen as an ominous possibility. I never thought Daniel would give it any thought. I buried myself in misery for almost half an hour. I forced myself to ignore the possibility that I had ruined our relationship because the thought was too painful to bear. My mind was consumed by yet another concern. Something seemed odd with Daniel's behavior and farewell remarks. Even though my husband had always been completely committed to me and our family, I was finally afraid of the impact my ultimatum might have on him. He may hurt himself, I thought. May he? He stands to lose a lot of money and custody of our kids if we were to get a divorce. By using biased legal systems, we became aware of instances when ex-wives denied their children access to their parents. Does Daniel ever think about hurting himself? Yes, damn it. Worry grew. The mobile phone rang, but Daniel didn't pick it up. He had already departed when I phoned his parents to see whether he was still with them. It had baffled them. Following his embraces with our 3 children, Daniel remained just long enough to go. In my haste to find his vehicle, I raced to every establishment that sprang to mind. I needed to contact my dad for assistance, since I was so engrossed that I ran out of petrol. He saw that I was upset and took me home in his car. I sobbed and told my parents that Daniel had abandoned me at that moment. My father's comments made his feelings toward Daniel quite apparent, and my mother's eyes showed the anguish she was feeling. At last, I got my mom okay to go home, and she dropped me off at my vehicle. I returned home and promptly slept off on the sofa. My dreams woke me up in the wee hours of the morning. Once again, fear struck around 7 in the morning, just as I was beginning to feel a little groggy. In a state of panic, I searched my phone for any messages, but there were none. My attempt to reach Daniel's mobile phone ended in voicemail. It was as if the device had been accidentally switched off or ran out of juice. On the kitchen counter, his charger was next to mine. I found out he hadn't turned up when I phoned his employer. I went to the police and explained my husband's departure, but they were of little help. The clock had already struck 9 in the morning. Every single acquaintance in Daniel S. address book that I contacted had no idea who he was. Throughout the day, I drove to every possible location, coming home every couple of hours to see whether Daniel S.'s vehicle had surfaced, but it never did. His cell was still inaccessible. Hi, at room 405, 9:00 p.m. Jacob S. message shot chills down my spine, but I choked down my emotion. Reality temporarily invaded. Then, still not knowing where their son was, Daniel S.'s parents contacted. I requested that they look after the children for a while. When I returned home, I sobbed uncontrollably onto the sofa. It was 3:00 in the morning when I suddenly woke up, so I must have drifted asleep again. Overwhelmed with hopelessness, I attempted to summon a picture of Daniel, but was unable. Thoughts of losing my sanity crossed my mind, as I felt an unreasonable confidence that he was dead. My mobile was still in the passenger seat when I fearfully went back to my vehicle. My oldest sent one message, and Jacob sent 5. I paid attention to the one from my kid about missing her mom, but I disregarded the others. At around midday, I searched every possible nearby suicide spot, including bridges, ravines, and isolated regions, but I couldn't find Daniel S.'s vehicle. In a last-ditch effort to get some answers, I recontacted Daniel S.'s parents, but to no avail. I tried to get in touch with all of his pals again. I got the impression that Daniel wasn't being completely forthright when I contacted his oldest buddy, who also happened to be his former employer. I looked up his location and decided to drop by his home to see if Daniel S.'s vehicle was there, since I thought something wasn't right. After searching a wealthy area, I located the home, but Daniel was nowhere to be seen. A Lexus with a noticeable grille parked 3 homes down grabbed my eye as I continued on my route. It was Jacob S. Outside one of several opulent mansions, the vehicle was parked. All of a sudden, I wanted to talk to my buddy Jacob about how I was feeling. I pulled up to the front door after parking my vehicle. Indicative of a Sunday afternoon get-together, I could make out muted rustling within. A security keypad, doorbell, and intercom button were all located on a panel next to the entrance. The button was pushed by me. Mr. Blake, Jacob S. Business S. General Manager, met me at the door. I wanted to meet with Jacob. Recognizing me, Mr. Blake asked me inside, but I opted to wait outside since I was self-conscious about my disheveled look. To retrieve Jacob, Mr. Blake consented. Jacob stepped out to greet me not long after that. He kissed me, embraced me, and held me tight against the wall after he swiftly made sure we were alone. I found solace in Jacob's embrace, which evolved from a kiss to a hug as my emotions were head over me. I told Jacob about my disturbing experience with Daniel the night before, when he accused me of adultery and seemed to know my intentions. Jacob was anxious to hear what had occurred, so I was afraid Daniel had done something severe when he disappeared. Our passionate time was cut short as a furious lady exploded into the scene, accusing Jacob of treachery and bemoaning their decision to flee similar problems, implying a history of difficulties. I intervened on instinct, putting distance between Jacob and the angry lady to shield him from danger. Because I was an obvious target for the furious lady, she turned around and hit me with a strong backhand, sending me tumbling against the wall. Because of the collision, I inadvertently pressed the intercom button, and I screamed in agony. I fell to the floor in shock as the enraged lady persisted in her attack on Jacob. After Jacob's wife had an angry outburst, the CEO of the business stepped in to calm the situation down by forcefully but kindly restraining her. Jacob and I were told by our employer to meet with him in his office on Wednesday at 9:00 a.m. after he quickly addressed the problem. Jacob was devastated emotionally as he escorted Jacob's wife back inside. He hurried to his vehicle and sped away, leaving me bewildered and overpowered by the whole experience. I mustered up the strength to go home after feeling completely devastated. My mom took the phone call, and I was soon picked up by my dad and sent to their residence. I sobbed all night long, slept through most of the next day, and then sobbed some more. Our company's general manager and HR manager had a meeting on Wednesday to go over the problem. After listening to my side of the story, they opted against firing Jacob until his wife made a decision. The fact that Jacob's wife had snatched the kids and run away to live with her mom was known to the employer. Instead of terminating my contract immediately, they have opted to allow me till tomorrow at the end of the day to get in touch with them. The boss said that it was still a violation of trust, in response to the HR manager's query about whether they trusted Jacob's assertion that we had not been intimate. They bemoaned the difficulties of interpersonal interactions, with the HR manager venting his annoyance at people's lack of contentment with their current situation. On Wednesday night, I felt well enough to contact my in-laws to see how the kids were doing. I thought I could handle meeting the kids, but I was terrified that Daniel's parents would hold me responsible for their son's absence if I faced them. I intended to persuade them to leave the kids at home so they wouldn't have to face me. But when Daniel's mom told me that the 3 kids wouldn't see me and would phone the cops if I came there, my spirits plummeted. She cut off the phone before I could answer. My realization that I had defecated brought me to a state of disorientation as I lay on the kitchen floor, stiff and aching. The sun was lowering as I got out of my lengthy shower. My phone call was made just after dusk. As I quickly glanced at my phone, I saw that the time was 7:00 p.m. tomorrow, Tuesday. For close to 24 hours I had been off it. Tell me what happened. I was still hell-bent on getting my life back under my control, even though I felt better than I had in days. I ignored the overwhelming fear that Daniel's death may be imminent. I took courage from my children and went unexpectedly to see my in-laws before bringing the kids back home. I was taken aback to see my own parents' automobile parked outside Daniel's parents' home when I arrived. They hurriedly escorted me back to my vehicle as soon as I parked. I stood firm, insisting on seeing my kids. I grudgingly followed my father's instructions and went home when he told me they weren't there. I inquired as to the location of my children upon returning home. By implying that they had just talked with him, my father reassured me that Daniel was alive and had the children. After that, I wanted to know where Daniel was. My parents gave each other strange looks before finally confessing that he had taken the kids to see someone. In her disappointment and impatience, my mother spoke out against what I had done and supported Daniel's account of events rather than mine. I was embarrassed, so I stayed quiet as my mom went on. My heart sank as she brought up Daniel's run-in with Madison Brooks, an old acquaintance of mine. I was already worried about Daniel and Madison's relationship when she left for a business school distant from our town, and her recent divorce only made me worse. My parents' confession that Daniel had brought the kids to see her only served to heighten my fear. After seeing Daniel's condition, Madison brought him to her house, where he has been ever since. Daniel had brought the kids to meet Madison and her kids to gauge their compatibility, my parents told me further. Despite their apparent mending fences, they reassured me that Daniel and Madison had been on good terms before to this. I was furious and demanded that Daniel give me a second opportunity. My parents, on the other hand, told the story from Daniel's point of view, saying that my fabrications about staying late at the office and seeing another guy hurt him. My dad always made it clear that infidelity included more than simply physical violence. It also included emotional duplicity and betrayal. He brought up the red flags that Daniel had seen, such as my lipstick smears and the notes outlining my manipulation schemes. My father's disapproval was obvious as I attempted to explain that I had no intention of threatening Daniel. He stressed how my behavior had harmed Daniel and our family as a whole. As my parents expressed their disgust, I became very still and stared at the table. I started to understand how much of a chasm had opened up between Daniel and me emotionally, and how far we had lied to each other over the previous 8 months. I had the realization that my marriage could really be irreparable. My mom let me think about it for a while before she eventually spoke up. Sobbing into my phone, I wailed, "How are the kids and I going to survive without Daniel?" My dad gave my mom the silent signal to start talking after they exchanged serious looks. "Olivia, Daniel has been struggling with this decision for the past 4 days. He's been wondering if the children would be better off with you or him. But because of the threats you made, he feels he can risk leaving them with you," she added, directing her gaze to my father. With an additional, "We have to be honest with you, Olivia. We share his concerns," my father said. I was taken aback and needed some time to absorb what they said before responding. "If we support you, we might lose access to our grandchildren." Okay. I felt deceived and my frustrations were boiling over. I leveled the accusation. "So you were siding with him?" My dad said, "Olivia, you brought this on yourself." So bluntly. However, I was unyielding. "I'll fight you all. The courts usually favor the mother in custody battles. He can approve I cheated because I didn't." "Olivia, it's not about proof," my mom said. She said things that made me understand how vulnerable my position was. "Daniel wants out of the marriage. The children are old enough to have a say in court, and if they were asked tonight, you wouldn't stand a chance." If you lose, you could lose custody for good. Her comments struck me hard. As I saw my last chance dwindle, I bolted from my vehicle and drove away. The court granted an interim order 2 weeks after that. Daniel was in a better position than the other parents because of his secure employment, close relationship with the children, 6 months of main caregiving, and stable housing arrangement. His case for custody was strengthened since the children's choices were also considered. In contrast, I had no steady income, no job, and couldn't afford the home buyout. It was obvious what the judge had decided. My sense of myself began to return once the divorce was completed, and the required 10-month separation period came to an end. I made an effort to be a kind mother whenever I saw the kids, and my parents eventually forgiven me. It got to the point where I consented to join Daniel and his fiancée at their engagement wake. After I obtained the final divorce paperwork, Jacob sent me a nasty email in which he blamed me for his breakup and unemployment. After giving it some thought, I came to the conclusion that my own greed and discontent were the main reasons my marriage dissolved. Nightmares were the only remaining problem, but they went from happening every night to barely happening once or twice per week.